When I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in journalism. My first job was at the LA Times, and I covered government. And I really could see, wow, these people are making big decisions that affect everyday lives. And they're just average people. They're doing public service, they're donating their time. So I wanted to run for city council because I wanted to make it easier to bike and walk around my city of Encinitas. And I cared about the environment and environmental protections and representing the community and what the community was interested in seeing at the city. And then I ran for the state senate. My feeling is that working on the public good is the thing that's the most important. There's nothing that's more satisfying than doing something that's larger than yourself, than feeling like you're working on the common good.
Catherine, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We want to talk to you about serving. You have been a public servant for many years. Can you tell us why you got into public service?
Well, I was working as an attorney, and I had been on the Traffic and Public Safety Commission in my city of Encinitas, where I live, and I decided to run for city council. So I wanted to run for city council because I wanted to make it easier to bike and walk around my city of Encinitas, and I cared about the environment and environmental protections and representing the community and what the community was interested in seeing at the city. And so I ran for office the first time in 2014, and I was elected in 2014 to the city council. And then I ran for mayor in 2016 and won that seat, and then ran the next 3 cycles. So basically 16, 18, 20. And then I ran for the state senate and became a state senator just 2 years ago. So now this has been 10 years in elected office. And I got my start on the Traffic and Public Safety Commission, which was just, met once a month and talked about traffic issues. And it was a really great way to see what does a city do, how are decisions made. And so I was really grateful that I was able to start at the very, very bottom, because you learn so much as you go through all the different levels.
And was there a moment that sparked you to want to do this?
Well, I worked as a reporter before that. When I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern, and my first job was at the LA Times, and I covered government. So I covered in Ventura County the traffic commission for the entire, it was called Transportation Commission for the whole county. And I really could see, wow, these people are making big decisions that affect everyday lives. And they're just average people. They're doing public service, they're donating their time, and I care a lot about my city of Encinitas, which I'm 4th generation from there. So my great-grandparents moved there to grow flowers. And then I grew up there and went away for college. And then when we moved back and I was a full adult with kids, I care a lot about the future of the city. I wanted to make sure that people that I knew were represented on the city council with the environmental commitment and the desire to have more ways to get around town, biking and walking, not just so car-centric. And there was an opportunity to use my talents and interests in that way. And so what I wanted to do was participate on the Traffic Commission. But then when there was an opening on the city council, I went to one of the city council members and I said, "Do you have anyone else in mind? Because I'm really interested in doing this." And the answer was, "No, we have no one in mind." And so, it wasn't that I was really asked to run. It was that I saw a need and I wanted to do it, and I was happy that I could donate the time and interest to be able to get myself there.
And what was it like when you started working in that role?
Well, interestingly, I think that first election was the hardest of all of the elections. So I've been now in 5 elections and I haven't lost any, but the first one was so difficult because you're very uncertain about, well, does anybody care what I think about this topic? And what about these other topics that I don't have an opinion on that people are asking me about? And there's also immediately negativity associated with who are you talking to, or what team are you on? This kind of thing. And so I feel like that was the hardest race, was that first race. But then you understand the cycles and more how to be a candidate, because governing is so different than running. And so wearing those 2 different hats, it's a really important part of being able to serve, is being able to get to serve. So you have to go through the election process.
So what's the difference when you're governing versus when you're campaigning?
Well, there's this great saying that when you're campaigning, you're campaigning in poetry, but you're governing in prose, which I think is a great saying because the poetry is that you have to tell a story, you have to appeal to the heart, you have to speak in terms that people understand. And when you're governing, it's the details really matter. You have to be able to dig deeply, to understand nuance, to actually engage the work at a deep level, which I really like that part and think and want people who are smart and engaged to be in those seats. But in order to be effective in an election, you have to be able to have the poetry. And so I do feel like they're quite different skill sets.
So you have to be able to present really well when you're actually in the election cycle.
Yeah, and you have to really simplify. Elections end up being a lot about a much simpler message. You have to be able and willing to repeat it ad nauseum to different audiences all the time. You have to have an interest in talking to hundreds of different people. And when you're doing the governing, it's just a smaller group. You're talking to your other city council members or the professional staff or the constituents who are engaged on that topic. But when you're campaigning, it's just much broader.
And when you're serving the people, was it challenging?
It was extremely challenging because there is an element to politics, which we're all aware of, that's vicious. It's really vicious. And at the local level, there are things that are used against you that are very personal, like a photo of us camping in an area outside the Grand Canyon, and some people who were opposed to housing putting housing density on top of a vacation photo I'd posted on social media. So it's something like that where you realize that your personal things can really be used against you, and then that's shown at a city council meeting, and there are people who approach you on the street and in a way that's is lacking in civility, and so there can be that element. Also, there's a long public comment period, so a lot of city council meetings would have at least elements of them that had a tremendous amount of negativity. And as the mayor, I'm fielding all that. It's important to me to be actively listening to people. So I'm trying to hear the core of what they're saying and then respond to it when appropriate. But you have to manage all of that. And so that's something that's particular to local government. It can be emotionally very difficult. But you also recognize you signed up for this. This is your job. All parts of jobs have things that are not appealing and that are difficult emotionally to manage. And so you just have to, I think, have the right attitude about it. But I don't want to become combative with people either. I want to have a civil dialogue. So it was important to me that I would try to maintain that. But sometimes you don't. It takes two to tango. Some people don't want to have a conversation. They really want it to be an ambush. And so you have to be able to figure out how to navigate that. Because we will disagree, but there are ways to disagree without being disagreeable. And we need to cultivate and care about civility, because ultimately that is the way that you make progress with a community. I mean, it's not that there is always the winner and the loser. It's that we can move forward together. And how do you do that? It really has to start with civility.
This kind of the city council, the city role is a lot of times kind of voluntary, right? There's a very limited pay for it, right?
Exactly. It's very limited pay. So I was working as an attorney. I was doing estate planning, which was flexible, so I could see clients on my own time, and I didn't have to appear in court and also be on the city council. So when I was on the city council, I was managing both of those. When I became the mayor, I stopped my law practice because there were just too many demands on the time, and I wanted to really be present and show up in all the ways possible. So I wanted to be on outside boards, like I was on the Airport Authority and the Water and Wastewater District boards and the Transportation Board, which is called SANDAG. I was the chair of that. And then I also wanted to go to community events. There'll be things that are happening during the day. And it was just too difficult to manage the time commitments and energy commitments of both those jobs.
So you're mentioning it was a tough role because you had sometimes it was vicious and sometimes the dialogue wasn't there. Was there a time that made it worth it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, One of the most difficult things that we did was to build the coastal rail trail. And it's funny because a coastal rail trail doesn't seem like it would be that controversial. And I think you are personally aware of that rail trail, right? In Encinitas. It's in Cardiff. I realized a number of lessons going through that. One of them is that as a decision maker, I don't have to also be the activist. I don't have to fight every fight with every community member that might be opposed to something. People had lost their mind over the idea of this trail going in, and it resulted in, we went to the Coastal Commission on appeal, and we had, in the election, there were yard signs that my neighbors had with my name and their line through it, and it was, no rail trail. The person who founded No Rail Trail ran against me for mayor. It was a really very difficult community. When you're at odds with community and it's so split, it's extremely difficult. But the rail trail is built and it is beloved. And every time I'm on it, I think, thank goodness I said yes to this. I feel like this was worth the fight, because it would have been so much easier to just say, forget it. No, people don't want this. Why are we doing it? But it creates public space where there wasn't before and allows people to walk and bike between downtown Cardiff and downtown Encinitas, the underpass of the railroad at Santa Fe, and access the beach, look at the beach, have an amazing way to be outside with their dogs and their friends and their baby strollers. And I mean, just the quality of life enhancements that come from that rail trail are incredible. And I feel so proud of fighting that fight. And it was legitimately very difficult.
And how did you keep going when you faced those difficulties?
I mean, what I realized through that was that I don't have to be the activist, meaning I am a decision maker here and I want to take input and have a process for taking input, but then be able to make the decision. And I'm not going to be in a perpetual back and forth dialogue of having to relitigate it again and again and again and again. So there's an orderly process we have for decision making, and just following that instead of meeting every individual or large group that's opposed to it on the trail to discuss exactly what's going to happen with this inch and this. I mean, there are different roles, right? We have professionals who design these things. Of course, that's not me, but I make a decision, yes or no. And so just recognizing what is the role exactly. And the role of being a decision maker is different from being the activist who's fighting for it or fighting against it.
Does this viciousness that has come into these roles, do you think it's pushing people away out of public service?
Definitely, especially on things like school boards, where people, they care about the schools and they volunteer their time to do it, and they take so many arrows and it's so personal, and people decide, I have better things to do with my life force. I think what's more common, though, is that people are deciding not to run. In the city of Encinitas, the campaign contribution limit is only $250. So people are raising relatively low amounts of money. But in many races, you'll see that there are only 2 people running for the city council or for the mayor. And why do we not have more candidates? I mean, I really think there's an assessment of this is the low pay, the high exposure, the high negativity, the difficulty of being in conflict. I think people decide it's not worth it for them to do that. But we need good people in government. The process of running for office at a state level and also at a federal level is so intensive with the endorsement process and the number of different constituency groups and advocacy groups that you need to seek the endorsement of, the high amounts of money you need to raise. I do feel like there are many barriers. And so people who make it that gauntlet, I mean, for the most part, I do feel this is true of my colleagues in the state Senate on both sides of the aisle, are uniformly extremely smart and very motivated and hardworking and want to do right by the state. It's not an easy path to get there. So I do think we do end up with good people at all levels, but I think particularly at the local level, it can be hard to get people to want to raise their hand.
Now, you being the 4th generation from Encinitas, from your city, did that help you? Was that a motivating factor for you to continue?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because that was what made me care so much. I don't think I would have run. I had lived in other cities because I went to school in Chicago and I moved to Salt Lake City, where I didn't have a cultural or deep family roots, a relationship to the place, even though I love the outdoors and I met my husband there and we really, really liked living there. But It was when I moved home that I cared deeply about what would happen to my city in the future. And that's when I decided to run for office. And I also, just being able to launch a campaign, to start a campaign, to have a network of people that supported me, to feel comfortable doing it, the deep roots in Encinitas, that was all part of it. I don't think I would have run for office in any other city, honestly.
Did you ever think you would be in the public service role?
When I was a reporter, I covered government for about 5 years before law school, and I had thought that it would be really interesting and also worthwhile to spend my energies and time doing that, but I never really saw an entry point. So it wasn't something that was ever a possibility. And then it was when I moved back to my home, when I decided to run for the Traffic Commission and I was appointed to it, and then seeing like, oh, okay, this is what city council members do, and this is how the government works. And I was on that for 4 years. So I was able to have a sense of that, and then getting to know some of the city council members as well, because I did the estate plans for 2 of them. As an attorney, they hired me to do that. So I was able to chat with them in more depth, and those things all needed to line up, at least for me personally, to end up where I am now. My mom was instrumental in helping me with the launch party, the very first party, inviting her friends and
to get donations.
And to get donations, but they're like I think it was $15, a donation of $15 to come to the launch party, which was to get some money going, but it's mostly just to be there, to hear me, to take a flyer, ask your friends if they would host a community coffee, because you do a lot of coffees with 10 and 15 people in someone's backyard. I mean, that's really, I did a lot of those. That was really key to my success.
And what about now? How does it work now for you?
It is so different now. The jobs are night and day different between being in the legislature and being on the city council. And the campaigns are totally different as well. I mean, as a city council member or mayor, I didn't really have a consultant. We didn't do polling. There wasn't a professional, like, if we're having 8 pieces of mail, what is the theme for each one? This kind of thing, which is what you have at a state level. Yeah, the campaign was totally different. And I didn't do community coffees. You only do fundraisers because you need to maximize your time to be able to generate the funds needed to communicate with 1 million people. That's really a big difference, is that huge district. But also just the job itself. A legislature, at the local level, you have the Brown Act, which means you can't talk to each other outside of the public as a majority. So like 3 people can't get together and decide what they're going to do. But in Sacramento, you talk to each other privately all the time, and that's how things actually happen, is that you get together with people who are on the committee or otherwise, or the leadership does, and says, hey, we're going to do a focus on retail theft and fentanyl this year. Let's put together a committee and a select committee, and let's have hearings. And so all this is happening. It's like, but basically in a way that's not at a public meeting. And so that is just a night and day difference.
Now, working with the constituents, you have over 1 million, right? Is that overwhelming?
Well, the great thing too is that I now have professional staff who work for me. So I have 3 offices. This is another way that it's so different, is I have Laguna Hills, where we are right now, and then an Encinitas office, and then a Sacramento office. And I go between those 3. And as a city council member or mayor, I had none of my own staff. They all work for the city. So you're only yourself responding to emails. You're only yourself taking those calls. And now I have a professional staff who goes out and represents my office and me. And that means that we're at ribbon cuttings, and we're able to do certificates, and we're able to respond to constituents who have a complaint about a state agency. All of these things can happen because I have staff that can help.
In terms of people that want to get into public service, do you have any advice for them, or do you have a message for people to get more involved?
I think there's nothing that's more satisfying than doing something that's larger than yourself, than feeling like you're working on the common good. We talk a lot about various societal ills around mental health, depression, isolation, loneliness, anxiety, and a lot of things come back to this at core: spending time with people that you care about, working on things that are important to you that you care about. And My feeling is that working on the public good is the thing that's the most important. And I feel so grateful that I've been able to spend the last 10 years doing that, and hopefully we'll be able to keep doing it. But I also encourage people to consider running for office, because you really are at the table, not on the menu. You know, you are the one who is making decisions about the types of things that come in front of you. And there's just tremendous impact from that. And is really like almost no comparison to other things that you might do. But of course there are the sacrifices. You know, one sacrifice is that I travel to Sacramento from my home in San Diego almost every week. And so being away from the family for 4 days a week is a lot. And my husband and I have 2 teenagers. And so, you know, I have to have a social support system in my family that allows that, which I do, and I'm grateful for. But not everybody has that. And I recognize how hard it can be.
How do you keep going with, this is a challenging role, like you have to travel a lot and there's a lot of people to serve. How do you keep going?
I think it's very energizing doing this work. And the thing that you could get down about is that there are so many problems. You know, we have climate change, and we have high costs of living that are going up, and things that seem really difficult, like insurance costs going up. We have homelessness, which we seem completely unable to make good progress on, which I think is a top problem in the state. But part of it is just, you put one foot in front of the other. You know, I feel like at the end of the day, you're doing the best you can with where you are at any time. And I think about that sometimes when I can feel like, oh my gosh, are we making any progress on this particular problem? You just put one foot in front of the other. And the other thing is, this is my experience in local government, is that sometimes there are these big, immovable problems that seem like they're so fixed. And you work on it in the way you can, and then something shifts, and all of a sudden there's a crack. And like before that, it seemed like a wall. But then there's a shift, and you see like, oh, okay, I can move here. So you can introduce a bill, or you can get money for something, or that it's an idea. Like there's a time when there's not an idea, and then there's an idea. So it's like it comes, you just have to keep working on it.
Do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
Well, one of the things that I think about is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had a quote, which you may have seen on shirts and hats and all sorts of things, which is, women belong in all places where decisions are being made. I do think that we need more women in positions of power, in leadership positions, in elected office. And I encourage all the women and all the men who support women in their lives, because men are critical allies for women, to be striving for leadership and attaining equality and living a full life themselves. So that's something that I think is really important.
Catherine Blakespear, California State Senator, it was great to have you on California Insider.
Well, thank you for interviewing me.